Um, Introduce myself. I am Graham. I am a forever DM at the moment. Actually, that's not true. I do get to play quite a bit. I run a campaign that I call the Dragon Fields, or TDF. You can tell it's probably an acronym of the Dragon Fields. It is a D&D 5e campaign that I started about 2.5 years ago. Because I wanted to play more Dungeons and Dragons and couldn't find enough real world friends to play with in real life. That and scheduling 6 people to sit in a room is pretty hard, so I started a campaign on Roll20, which has worked out pretty well so far. Today, I'm going to give you a little rundown of sort of how my campaign's made up, a bit of background detail on campaign, all that sort of stuff, how I use Roll20 in anger, sometimes more angry than others, but mostly it's actually a pretty useful tool. Does a lot of good stuff. And so talk you through how I store my maps, all my character details, and all that sort of jazz. And unveil some of the curtain a little bit. So for those of you that are worried that you have to prepare entire novellas full of back content for your campaigns before you even get going, I'm here to prove that that is entirely not, well, at least what I do. Your mileage may vary. As we go along, for those of you that do have microphones or are in the Discord, feel free to shout out questions. There aren't that many of you, so we shouldn't have to worry too much about you talking over each other. But if someone else is talking, then just let them speak. And yeah, let's try and make it more interactive than me just droning on for the next however long. And if you've got any questions, then I'm happy to answer them. Anything at all related to this stuff.
Good catch.
Let's go. I mean, I don't know when the coronavirus isolation is lifting, but I do know about D&D. So let's crack on. So my campaign is, it's like I say, it's a D&D 5e campaign, but it's a little different than most regular campaigns in that it's based on a system called the West Marches. And the idea is that you have more players than you have slots in each game. So I normally run games up to 5 people, but I have about 15 people in the group. What that means is that we have games quite regularly because there's generally always 5 people who want to play. But it adds a sort of another layer where if one group doesn't quite succeed, then maybe another group's going to go back, steal all the treasure, or whatever. The other slight difference to most campaigns is that in a West Marches, the beginning and end of a session, you always start and end back in your hometown. There's no sessions that run longer than a session. There's no sessions that last longer than a session. Bad grammar. Most of our sessions we run in the evenings from 7 to 11 o'clock. So that's 4 hours of D&D. You start in the town, you end in the town. Here is our beautiful Flamescar, which is the town our adventurers start and finish in. You should be able to see that. It'll come up on the Twitch in a moment. Now, what that means is effectively every time we play, I'm running a one-shot for the players that have come in, but they keep the same characters. They're still growing. The world is always there, and another slight difference is that unlike regular D&D campaigns, is you don't start off as a hero. You have to earn that. You have to go out and adventure and find out what's out there and make your name. It's quite hard, my campaign. You can see in the bottom right hand corner of this map, there's the graveyard. There is a whole bunch of dead adventurers in there.
Holy shit.
I think we've had about 18 so far in the 2.5 years, which is way more than normal campaigns. But I don't kill characters willy-nilly. Generally, all information is available, and it just depends on what the party wants to do, whether they want to run in and try and fight, or I would hold my hands up and say I don't think any character in here unjustly died. Nobody had rocks fall on them while they were, doing the vacuuming or anything like that, which is good. Now, why am I telling you all this? Because the one-shot nature makes it quite easy in the sense that we got 4 hours. We come in, we play some D&D, and we stop again. But like I say, there's the larger world there. So the world doesn't change, the characters don't change, and depending on what the characters do, they change the world. Depending on where they want to go, they can change the world. In fact, if I show you /TDF map. So this is a map that I'm going to bring up now, a map that the players have created themselves. I don't give them a map. It's up to them to remember where they've been adventuring and what they've found. Depending on where they go, depends on what adventure they have. Sometimes they're told about things if they ask NPCs. Sometimes there's just more obvious things, or sometimes we link things into their backstory. But exploration is the key part of my campaign, for them to go out, learn a bit about the world, fight some baddies, get some treasure, and then eventually become heroes. Now there is also a kind of a more overarching storyline. The storyline of my campaign is that the dragons have returned after quite many a year ago being defeated. They used to use this area, the area of the dragon fields, as a place where they would used to come and fight each other when they got bored of their treasure and having completed everything in their life. The dragons would come and fight, and so the world of men and elves and everything else didn't like that too much because they kept getting their towns burnt down. So they rose up, they killed all the dragons. Everyone was happy for a few thousand years, until now the dragons have started rising. So that's the overarching kind of campaign, but that only comes up when the characters interact with it, or as supplementary stuff. Now, why am I telling you that? Because putting those two things together, we've got lots of one-shot type sessions of 4-hour blocks, and we have an overarching campaign. That means that every session I prep is and all the work in terms of all of the world building and prep I do is for the next adventure. I haven't really done a whole lot of prep for the entire campaign. That summary that I've given you of dragons coming back and people not being too happy is pretty much where I started 2.5 years ago. And depending on whether the characters have been interacting with that storyline or going and doing other things, depends on how quickly or slowly that progresses. Now, what that means is I have a whole bunch of maps in this page toolbar. If you open Roll20, you'll probably that's going a bit crazy. You'll find that your page drop down probably won't be as busy as this. I think I've made. I say made. I'll get into why I put that in quotes in a bit. But I have uploaded and created on this service probably about 100 pages of maps that the adventurers have been on. And I think if you're watching this stream, this is probably it's a little delayed, right?
Yeah, now it's up.
Yeah, okay. So I just when I talk about things, I'll make sure I pause a little for the stream to catch up. So you can see if you have a look at that, that we've got a whole bunch of grassy maps. We've got different cities there. So there's on the third row down, there's all my maps for Bastion Bay, which is one of the pirate towns in the world. Then there's just a whole bunch of other stuff, really. One thing I'll just stop on this while it's relevant as well. You'll notice that my page drop down is actually filling the entire screen. You won't have that by default with Roll20 because for some reason they decide that a horizontal scroll bar is more useful than a drop down like this. I couldn't disagree more, because you can see I've got lots of maps. Me having to scroll to the right and then move them around is a right nightmare. So what I've done is one of the first things I did was I installed a piece of CSS, which is a what's it stand for? Custom style script. And what that does is runs a little piece of code every time I load this website to make that drop down format in a different way. I use I've got a handout I'll pop into the Discord as well for afterwards to talk you through step by step on how to add this onto the website if you want to. But basically, you add in a plugin to your browser of choice, and then you tell it that when you go to the right URL to add in this bunch of code here, which again is in the handout. And what that does is it makes it so that your page drop down is way more usable in my book. It means you can say, oh, actually, I want to move this water map from here over to here, and generally you can do it. It's still not great. It could definitely be better if it was built into the tool, but it's a marked improvement. So for those of you that are generating lots of maps, this would be quite useful. If you're only doing like a one shot or a smaller campaign, this might not be too useful. But as soon as you get more than about 6 or 7 maps, scrolling across the horizontal bar at the top is quite a pain. The other thing about this page drop down is that there's no organization at all given to you by the tool, by Roll20. So you can't put maps into folders, or which would actually be quite useful. So it would be really handy if I could make a folder called like Bastion Bay and then put all my maps for that one area into that. So again, having this drop down is quite useful because it means without the folders you don't have to worry too much. You can link to maps and things in your compendium, and I'll talk a bit about that later, but it's not particularly useful from a DM's point of view for navigating when you're trying to generate stuff. Another top tip is make sure you name your maps. I have a very bad habit of just chucking a new page. When you click create a new page, it will create a blank white page that's got untitled underneath it. As you can see, a lot of my maps are still untitled. That's not too much of an issue whilst you have them in your drop down here, because you can just click on them, it's fine. But they have this handy thing called archive where you can put all your maps, any maps you're not using anymore, you can chuck them into this archive. Probably does something helpful to make your Roll20 run quicker, I'm not too sure. But it means you can then restore them if you want to bring them back. Now, if you have a whole bunch of untitled maps in here, that makes it very difficult when you want to bring them back because you have no idea which map is which. For obvious reasons, that's a pain. So that's the page drop down. That's a bit of talking around making this a bit more usable. Again, for the newer Roll20 people, that might sort of whiz over your head a bit if you've not used the drop down too much. But certainly once you start using it, revisit maybe the style script, or just make sure you name them. That would be quite handy. Let's give you an example of one of the maps I've made here. So you can see I've got lots of different maps. Why does that keep closing? That's annoying. From forest encounter maps right through to kind of dungeon maps, the kind of things that are much more useful. I'll give you an example of a couple of different types of maps that I use on this campaign. So Yeah, we've got our regular kind of forest battle map type things we've got here. So you can see this one is just a piece of dirt with a road, a grid. You know, you can chuck tokens down, move people around, have battles, all that kind of stuff. It's fairly straightforward. I'll just let the stream catch up so you can see that. There you go. So this fairly plain and easy map. These bushes here, because I was being particularly lazy, there's a whole bunch of white space which was annoying me. So these are actually objects brought in from the compendium onto the map layer. These green trees on the right hand side. You can just search in the right hand side for things like trees and just bring them in. Et voila! You can do that, you know, if you want to, or you can add them into the map, use them for cover, things like that. That sort of thing I think has been covered in other workshops, so I'm not going to dwell too much on that today. So that's one sort of map. That one's fairly regular. You know, you kind of seen those sort of maps before. A slightly different type of map we've used before are isometric type maps. So I didn't make this map, but I just borrowed it from somewhere. In fact, I bought this from somewhere. You can see that this is a slightly different view of a battle map. You're actually looking at it from a kind of a 45-degree angle downwards. Some of my players really like this. Some of my players find it really headache-inducing because it's quite confusing. And that's loaded. I wonder. 1, 2, 3, 4. I think everyone that's in the stream is on the Discord, right? I think that's probably true.
Most of us are, some aren't.
Okay, I'll carry on as we are then. Yeah, so this isometric map here, you can move players around just as you do normally. But if I show you what their view looks like, it's quite a bit different. Is it that one? There you go. So I've got dynamic lighting on this map, and again, I'll talk you through that in a bit. Oh, why is this so slow? There you go. So it gives them a completely different view to normal top-down maps, something else to sort of challenge themselves to think about, as it makes it a bit more interesting. As I said a minute ago, some of my players really like these because they're a bit different. Some of them absolutely hate them. In fact, the person's token I'm using right now, he always moans at me after we've used them because he's not a big fan. But I like to mix it up a little. Now those are, you can see that map's quite complicated, it's quite large, there's quite a lot of dynamic lighting I've drawn on. In fact, if I show you the dynamic lighting on this map, you'll see everywhere where there's a yellow line on this new view is a line I've drawn in order to make the dynamic lighting work on Roll20. Now that took quite a bit of time. In fact, making dynamic lighting layers is probably a solid half of my prep time normally, especially if it's a map with dynamic lighting, because it can take quite a while. The isometric maps are especially fun because you have to draw them at the right angle so that it doesn't restrict as players are moving around corners, and generally okay, but if you look sort of in the middle of the map near where the token is, you can see there's some quite skewy angles, just so that they can see as they come around corners and things like that. I generally use dynamic lighting layer on all of my dungeon maps, even if they are in daylight, because you can control what the players can and can't see with dynamic lighting, even when it's daylight. Things such as doors and walls. So if we didn't have the dynamic lighting layer drawn up on here, then they would be able to see through all the walls and see other things. Now if I turn lighting on, if I turn global illumination on, and then show you what the character token can see, if I pop them in there and press the L, you can see that although global illumination is on, he can still only see through the walls that he would be able to see from where he's standing, rather than being able to see the whole map. So dynamic lighting is quite useful, not just from a lighting point of view, from like lights and torches and candles, but from actually being able to block the user out from seeing. Now imagine there was a door here as well, then we could draw a door in and he wouldn't be able to see that. Here's a apt timing for me to show you something else that I do. So talking through dynamic lighting layer, you can see that all of my I showed you a moment ago that all my lighting is in yellow. I generally draw that for two reasons. You use that color for two reasons. One, because it's really easy to see when you flick over to the dynamic lighting layer. If I've drawn that in black, which is generally the default polygon tool, then it kind of gets lost in the side of the map, so you can't see it, which is a bit of a pain. So yellow's a great color because you can see it really quickly. And then I use red for my doors. And what that means is that I can really quickly see which things need to be moved or deleted as my players approach and go through those doors or interact with those objects. So you can see here I've just put down a red line that symbolizes a door. And then if we go back to the token layer and show you what he can see now, you can see that he can no longer see down to that right where that door was, which is basically how I do doors and lighting. It's really simple. And then we'll move the player down to that door. He does what he needs to do to get through the door, rolls a check, punches it with his fists of power, whatever your player wants to do. And then you can just flick back over to the dynamic lighting layer, and you can either move it out the way entirely, or you can just delete the door, which is what I often do. So I try and draw them as close to the actual walls as possible, so they don't see anything extra. But you can see on this dynamic lighting layer that actually it goes straight down on this wall, and that's so from the kind of camera perspective. Once I delete that door, they can see into the entire room.
Just a question or a quick one.
Go on.
What if you have like a structural weakness in the dungeon, and basically what the players could possibly do is like break down the wall? Would it also work like this? Like you can just put like a red line on top and then just remove it and then kind of let them see through?
Yeah, exactly. So I think I have an example of that somewhere actually. Let's see if I can find that quickly. If not, I can just draw one and show you what I normally do. I do have a map which had some good stuff. So one of the problems with having lots of maps is that you lose them all the time. I've stared at this map page for hours. It feels like sometimes trying to find the map I need. Quite often I just give up. So I'm just gonna whip off this map though, because I think doing the dynamic lighting layer on this map is a little difficult. So what I'll just go onto a normal top-down map, and then we can see. I'll show you what I do for breakups. So yeah, exactly what you said. What I do is so if you imagine, I'm gonna just highlight this for you. So I've done a pink line. When it loads, you'll see it, which won't be long. There we go. So this is another drop-down map, look-down map, which I've got dynamic lighting layer drawn on. You'll see this one's quite a bit easier. At the bottom of this first corridor, there's some bushes here, which I've just highlighted in a nice pink thing there for you. If we now go onto the dynamic lighting layer, what I would do, say these bushes are a door that's kind of half broken, or spider webs that you can mostly see through but not really. Sometimes I just do things like this. So I uh, draw lines so that it's sort of not easy for players to see through, but gives it just a little more vibrancy. And so if I bring a character down who has some dark vision, pretty sure this one does, and show you what he can see. So you can see that after I've drawn these pink lines and brought this token down, that it gets a small view through these bushes and can see a bit of the path behind it, but he can't see too much of it.
Okay.
And I'll just let that catch up. So you can see I just drew those lines at kind of jaunty angles. And then this character will show you that those lines basically align up to being able to see a small amount.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah, that absolutely does.
Another thing just to point out on this map, as it happens to be one that has a path going under another path, is that the dynamic lighting layer will cut off the view of the player as they go down those steps in front at the bottom. At the bottom there, and then round the corner, you'll see that there's a yellow line which goes straight down the left-hand side of that corridor. That will block off the view for the token as they move round. I generally just move them to the other side at that point, like as soon as they come around the corner, just because it makes things a lot easier.
Would it not be possible to just write use the red color and just take? Oh no, it's a little bit more difficult. Don't get me wrong, but it would be possible, right?
Yeah, you can totally do that. What you need to remember to do, and this is something I'm really bad at, and why I don't often do it, is that the polygons that you draw, if you draw them all as one piece, you have to delete them all as one piece. So this line here, I've drawn as one big line. It's the whole side of that dungeon. Which, if I delete it, I'd have to delete the whole thing and redraw it. It's actually not that bad for this because it's only a few corners. But sometimes I'll go around all the outside of the map, and then I'll realise that there were windows, and I should have probably made them with either red lines or not at all. And quite frankly, sometimes I just can't be bothered to redraw it. So
yeah, no, it's fair. It's fair.
Yeah. Okay. Just going to leave this map and finish talking about all the different map types I do, and then I'm going to come back because it's useful. So we've gone through kind of a regular map, the isometric view. Sometimes you can find these, I think they call them like photogrammetry map or photorealistic maps. They look quite cool too. They're basically battle maps, but somebody's gone to the effort of making them look really nice. I'm just bringing one of them up for you to see there. This map I'm just showing you here was a fortune teller sitting atop a cliff top called Madame Ashmari, and she gave the PCs some fortunes of doom, and then everyone was happy. No one dived off the cliff or anything interesting like that. So you can see that that's a slightly better looking map. And then the only other type of map I do, and sometimes I do this if it's going to be more of a roleplay heavy section of the session, or if just having a map is going to bring the players too much into feeling like they have to move around or think in battle grid fashion. And that's basically just a whole bunch of pictures on a page that they can then look at. And it's nothing more complicated than that. So this page here, I'm just bringing up now, actually from the GM point of view, looks quite complicated. But from the player point of view, it doesn't look complicated at all. What this page is basically there we go. I just created a new page in the drop down and then just copy and pasted some pictures into the page that I actually put them all on the GM layer, and then as different things happen, I move them from the GM layer up to the main token layer so that the characters can see them. And so, in fact, I can show you exactly how this map went. So let's move that one to the back. So we started off with the players were off on an adventure. Yeah, that's it. Out at seas on their pirate ship. And so we started off with a simple picture of a ship at sea and a picture of a very handsome looking pirate there on the top left. He was the first hand, the captain of the ship. So we just did a bit of role play as they were making sail. In fact, the Twitch screen was just catching up. A little bit of conversation. They did some stuff. They went out. All that kind of role play type stuff you would do in your session. And then once they got into battle, I changed from this map to a kind of a more grid-based battle map with two ships. We had the battle on. We did some stuff. They were rescued by one of their pirate contacts in a much bigger ship. And they went for dinner with him afterwards. So then I came back to this map, and I already had on this map ready to go, but on the GM layer, and I think I need to make that slightly more opaque so you can see it. That's it. So you can see, as this loads in a second, you'll see that on the GM layer I've already got two other pictures ready to go. So I move the current picture to the GM layer, swap over to the GM layer, and then pull up these other two pictures that are sitting there at the back ready to go. And now on our token layer, our players see the grand new pirate ship, a picture of their contact on top right, the picture of their first mate on the left, and we go straight back into roleplay, but with just that kind of a bit of imagery to keep them thinking and have stuff for them to see as they interact. What I find is if you stay on a battle map, but like a grid-based battle map, and try and do roleplay, or move away from the map that you were on but don't show something, then the players will either say, oh, I can't see it, and say, yeah, that you're not meant to, or whatever. It just kind of saves breaking the flow a bit. It feels a bit more like you were prepared, and really it's just 4 pictures chucked on a map, and it took about 30 seconds to make,
So not to break immersion with that, right?
Exactly, yeah, and just to provide another bit of,
eye candy.
Yeah, exactly. When you're describing something, if you know what you're describing and you describe it to your players, you have an image, and then they start building up an image. If you have something on screen that looks something like what you're describing, then it helps them to see the image that you see as well. Yeah, and so that goes, not just on maps like that. I've also got a picture of a river that we've done before. So those are probably the 3 sorts of maps that I make in order to run my sessions, and they're all a combination of that. They're either grid-based, top-down, solid D&D maps, or they're pictures I've scraped off the internet somewhere, or they're funky isometric type stuff, which are basically the same thing anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Any questions on any of that? Okay, so before we move on, the only other thing I want to say about maps is if you're doing any dynamic lighting layer or with barriers and things like that, make sure you test them with player tokens that are set up with dark vision or vision first. If you double click on a token, you can check in the advanced setting that they have sight. If you grab a token that has sight and then move them around on your nicely set up dynamic lighting map, you can just make sure that you haven't drawn something in a stupid place or blocked off a route that you were expecting them to see through, things like that. And it doesn't take long after you've made the dynamic lighting layer. that brings us to the end of the map section. And now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my sidebar. This is what they call it, the journal. So this is where I put basically all of the stuff that the players are either going to get given as handouts, they're going to encounter as creatures and monsters or traps. Sometimes I even go to the effort of actually writing my adventure summaries in here. So it's quite a handy little place to keep all your stuff. And then it's in here for quick reference as well. You can see that I've got a few top level folders on here. They are traps, adventures, characters, NPCs, monsters, and handouts. They're the important ones there. Traps are literally what they say. There are a bunch of traps that are ready to go to remind me of, kind of. So one of them, for instance, spiked pit trap. It's just a 10 feet deep pit, and it tells me what damage and what kind of saving throws the characters need to roll. Just an in the tool reference for me in case I need them. And actually, I've only ever added these in when I've added them into a session. So we had a cave in one of the sessions. I added it in here at the time, and then it gives me a reference further on. In my adventures folder, there is a long... so actually, let's take a step back. You can make folders in here. I suggest you do. It makes organization a lot easier. For my fairly long campaign, we've run lots of adventures, as I said before, lots of kind of singular one-shots. And so pretty much for each of those, or at least for the bigger ones, I've got a folder in my adventures for that session. If you buy any of the pre-made modules from Roll20, they also come in here very much like this as well. The Case of the Scrupulous Pawnbroker is one of my folders in here, and this was a Roll20 module that I purchased. And so I'll talk you through that because it's actually laid out really, really nicely. In here, there is the adventure, a bestiary, some magic items, and then it's got a trap section as well. The adventure is you can open it, and it's basically a long old handout, which is just for the DM, which has basically got the description for all of the rooms. You know how you would open any sort of module, and it quite often has a map with numbers in it. This one came with a map as well. In fact, that map is in the top here, and then it tells you what's in each of these rooms. Now, what you can also do in these handouts is link to things. So you can see here that at the top of this, the first link is to Latricus, and if I click on that, it opens Latricus's character sheet. He's an NPC. He's got a bunch of stats. That linking is quite powerful. So now I've got my adventure summary, which I can pop out and open on a second screen or just have ready to go whilst I'm running the adventure, and then can click at each point when the characters get to that piece and quickly bring up the thing that they're going against. I.e., if they walk into room 2, I can click go into here. I can see that there's now zombies. Again, I can click on that and pull that up. It's all quite handy stuff. The more you fill out, the more you have to reference. It's up to you how much you fill out. My adventure folders are not as fully formed as this, but this is kind of a really good example of how to use the Roll20 tool. But then this was made by them, and it cost me £2 or whatever to run that session. Now, going back to my list of adventures, what I try to do is keep things generally in their folders. However, if there are more generic monsters or handouts, mostly, yeah. So what you need to remember is that if you have a handout in here that the player can see, so for instance you can see here that I've got the mountain pass view and it's got a little dot next to it. That means that it's been shown to, I think, all the players or some of the players. A dot means that someone else apart from you can see it, one of the players. That also means they can see what folder it's in, and that shows up like that in their journal as well. It doesn't show everything in that section, just that thing in that folder. So, for instance, if we open the ley lines, they have the mysterious circle, which means in their journal they will now also have the adventures folder, and then inside that the ley lines, and then inside that mysterious circle the handout, which is basically a picture of the thing that I described to them whilst running the session. And I'll just let that catch up so that you can see exactly what I'm talking about, so it's not too confusing. That's just something to think about when you're making handouts to give to players, that you don't want to go putting them in folders that are going to give them spoilers or anything like that. Just in case you're naming things in a way that you wouldn't want them to see. For instance, if I didn't want them to know that the mysterious circle was connected to the ley lines, then I'd maybe put that in a folder just called Handouts or something. Speaking of which, underneath my Adventures folder, if I close that, I have a whole Handouts section. This is for just generic handouts that I've given to the players over time. Quite often it includes things such as magic items or new creatures that they might have learnt about. There are quite a few reskinned monsters that I throw in here. I think we had some shiny monsters at some point, you know how you get them in Pokemon, similar in here. So again, this is a place for me to put those things where they can then find them quite quickly as players. When you're playing, it's useful to be able to quickly get the things you need. The magic item section in here is probably one of the most fully formed. Again, it's just a whole bunch of handouts with all the information that they would need. The information and the pictures are all things I've just scraped in from all general scraping sources, which I'll talk about in a bit. Don't really need that up. I have what I would suggest is a bad habit of using Google Docs or Word or something else, a different tool to write my notes for the session. I'm actually sort of recently coming to the thought that it would be a lot more useful if I put them straight in here because of the linking you can do, and then because it's all in one place to give to your players if you need to. It probably takes a little bit more time, especially if you break them down into separate handouts. Excuse me. Or magic items, etc. But it definitely serves you better, especially if you're running a campaign where those sort of things are going to be quite useful. Obviously, my NPCs are just all the NPCs that they've met. Gives me I try to stat the key NPCs that they're going to meet, just in case the characters feel the need to attack them. It's generally the only reason you kind of need stats is if they're going to go into any sort of fight. Other than that, it's basically just backstory and motivations, all that kind of jazz you would normally create. But these are some key NPCs that they come across quite a lot. They've had quite a lot of interaction with. It's worth taking the time to give them the stats to make them a bit more fully fledged. It also gives me an opportunity to think a little more about who they are and why they should exist. And give them a picture I can show the adventurers if I need to. I have a characters folder. That's just all the characters, all of my players' characters. They get a character sheet each. They fill it in. They run their own character. I generally don't care about what they're doing in there. As long as they're not cheating, I'm fairly happy. Because there's so many of them, I can't keep track with all of their characters. So I let them crack on mostly in that. And then the only other thing that I find quite useful is that you'll see I have a monsters folder here. Now, you may be asking yourself, why does he have a monsters folder when all the monsters are added as part of his adventure folders? That's a very good question, I hear you ask. Well, the answer is because actually you quite often use the same monsters on different adventures. And if you have created a monster and buried it deep inside an adventure, when you're trying to find it quickly, using the search, it's actually not too easy. I'll give you an example here. If I type ghost into the search, you'll see that I have 6 folders appear in that search. And inside those folders there are subfolders, and inside those subfolders there are the things, i.e. potentially a ghost. It happens to have shown up on this search that the ghost, because I already had monsters open, that you can see the ghost. However, it's very likely that inside one of these other folders there is a ghost or something. And you can see if I open adventures, there's another 9 or so folders. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, 9 folders, 8 or 9, can't count. Where there could be a ghost of some description. That's really not great if you're trying to find something quickly. I.e., if you're in a different session and you quickly want a ghost to pull one in, trying to open all of those and find it is a pain. So what I do with monsters that are more generic is that at the end of sessions I generally drag them into the monsters folder, just so that I have one place where I can find all of the monsters quite quickly. The other reason for doing that is if you open this search like this and you can see that I've just clicked the Solarium, Summoner's Remorse and the Dead Woods, I've opened those. So if I clear my search, it's going to have them opened full in the main, and now I've lost completely where I was because now I have to go through and minimize a whole bunch of stuff to get back to this monsters. So just by bringing stuff in, key stuff into here, you know that you can then quickly, like I now know that if I want a monster, I open my own monsters folder, I scroll to G, and if it's not there, then I can search for it, and that just speeds up that DM process a little bit while you're trying to run encounters for your players. Who else would you be running it for? I think that's largely everything to cover on how I use the journal. Are there any questions on any of that?
Oh.
Cool. Okay, so the next bit I'm going to talk about is, well, basically steal everything, but pay for what you can. Is what I entitled this section. Don't steal things; it's bad. But there is what I'm trying to say when I say that is there is a wealth of resources online of Dungeons and Dragons type material. There are modules you can buy and download. There are people who make free battle maps. There's people that make artwork and tokens. There's a whole bunch of stuff online that you can get access to help you build your Roll20. I mean, I probably don't need to tell you all this too much because you've used the internet before, I imagine. Except I've just managed to lose my journal. That's clever. No idea where that's gone. Um, that is odd. Well, apparently you can lose your journal, so that's new to me, but we don't need that anymore, so I'm not going to worry about that too much. Where were we? Yes, finding stuff online. Finding stuff online there's so much stuff you can find. And I've put a bunch of links in a handout. I'll post in Discord at the end of this. But there are, and when I say things you can find online, I don't just mean art and tokens, but even things like name generators or potion generators. Any of that kind of stuff is all really useful. Helps you to make your games, prep your games a lot quicker. Or even do what I do and pull this up during the session, and when they find elves, click on the elf name generator and find a name. You can be more prepared than me. That is probably advisable. But it's, as you can see, I already have 12 names of elves that I can now use in 3 clicks. My D&D URLs folder is pretty long. I suggest building your own of resources you can go back to. Excuse me. Some key sources for finding content for your Roll20 games. There's DM's Guild, which is the only place in theory you can buy things from Wizards of the Coast that is homebrew. There's loads of stuff on here. You can find it all. You can live to your heart's content. You can even set it so that there is it comes with battle maps or anything like that. I've got a bunch of stuff through here. You can That's quite a lot of stuff you can pull straight into Roll20. If it comes with a PDF, you can quite often just copy and paste the image straight from a PDF, save that, like copy and paste it into Paint, hit save, and then you can upload it to Roll20. You scale it around to your heart's content until you get it right, and then you've got your battle map directly onto there. No faffing about with having to print it out the right size, or taking it along to the sessions or anything like that. Google's a good resource as well. I said earlier, I've got 100 or so maps on here. Pretty much all of these have either come from me looking on things like DM's Guild or Googling frozen wasteland D&D map or water-based D&D map. Things like that will get you a long way, and then you can just save them out, post them on here. If you are just running for your friends, I wouldn't be too worried about just copy and pasting things from the internet and using them. If you decide you're going to become a world-class commercial streamer and start streaming your games to rival those of such as Critical Role, then I would be much more careful with making sure that you've both paid for and have the permission to use in a more kind of commercial setting, just to make sure you're not, breaking any licenses or any of that boring stuff that you don't want to get sued for. But yeah, other than that, just beg, steal, and borrow to build your campaign. That's what people have been doing for years. Just try and find as much as you can to pull in, help your players get what's going on. Another great way of actually getting more content without doing anything is by reskinning existing monsters and campaigns, modules to just be exactly the same but also completely different. Oh, sorry, my throat's getting dry. In your games, you are bound to have across all character levels encounters where they fight humanoid-based encounters, be it pirates, aliens, guardsmen, human traffickers, all that kind of fun stuff you get in D&D. Well, I've done that. We've had lots of different people. You'd be surprised how many times things like gladiators come up, or thugs, or guards. already pre-statted creatures inside the rules. You know, this guy is a CR5, I think. Yeah, CR5 monster. He's a man. He's got a few. He's got a reaction. He's got a shield, a spear, and he has a few attacks. So he's really easy. I can drop him right into any of my encounter building. I know he's a CR5. I know it's no problem. Now, if I take him and say, okay, he's no longer a gladiator. He's now a pirate first hand, and instead of having a spear, he has a scimitar. I literally don't have to change anything, except for the fact those words. And I describe him as that to my characters, but when I'm running the encounter, I'm still running him with exactly the same stats. And that helps, gives you now way more things to run without having to change too much. Things like gladiators, thugs, what else have I written down here? Berserkers, archers, all those kind of humanoids, but you can do it for anything. If you've got some weird sea creature, take a giant octopus, just reflavor it a bit, maybe mix it up. At the end of the day, as long as you keep the dice and the attacks and the action economy the same, you know where you are in terms of challenge rating. Now, what's the point of knowing anything about challenge rating unless you know how to balance an encounter? Well, a really good tool for that is Kobold Fight Club. This is a tool I use, I would almost say pretty much on its own in order to run my games. I find it incredibly useful to really quickly see how an encounter is going to go, and the more you use this tool, the more you get a feel for how well your party can deal with what it describes as easy, medium, hard, or deadly. It's really easy to use. You'll see in the top left-hand corner there's the group info. So if you've got 5 players at level 5, which is kind of a fairly standard party setup, you go on the right-hand side here. You search for the thing you want to find, and it has a whole bunch of sources that you can set, including pretty much everything you can think of. It's got all of the Wizards of the Coast modules, all of the Unearthed Arcana stuff, all of the best third-party community stuff people make, and a whole bunch of Critical Role and all the kind of stuff you would expect. Or you can add your own, so if you're feeling really keen. Plus a whole bunch of Reddit monster in a day things. Be a little careful with those, but you can see. So if we search for Gla, there we go. So if I search for Gla, GLA, that finds me 6 monsters. One of them happens to be the Gladiator that we were discussing earlier. That tells you that that's from the monster manual, so you know that that's nice, well balanced, ready to go. There's then a whole bunch of other monsters, including some from Monster a Day. That's a subreddit where they work on making monsters. But for this encounter, we're going to say I actually wanted a hard encounter against some gladiators. So I add 2 in. Well, I add 1 in first, and then it doesn't tell me it's hard. So I add a second one in, and it tells me it's hard. So now I know quite quickly that if I were to take my party of 5 level 5 players or player characters up against 2 gladiators, it's going to be a hard encounter for them. It then also tells me how much XP they're going to get for that encounter per player, which is really handy too. So I find this website really useful. I use it a lot. I don't use any of the manage encounters stuff that it's got up the top here. You can actually run your encounters through it as well, i.e. doing turn order and initiative and stuff. Just use Roll20 for that. But this is way better for kind of quickly statting out your encounters. And sometimes you can just spam some words into here and see if there's anything comes up as well. Like if you want a ghost filter, there we go. If you want a ghost of some description but you're not sure what, and you type ghost in here, well actually they have a type of creature called ghost. So in here I get a whole bunch of stuff, and I'll update in a second, that's not just the ghost creature from the monster manual, but also a bunch of other things, i.e. ghost shark, ghost walk spiders, a white pudding, which is from a module that had ghost wind. So a bunch of stuff. A useful tool. You may be getting an impression that a lot of my prep is focused around getting the players doing stuff and knowing what stuff they're going to do. That's pretty much it. I'm not a huge lore-focused DM. Now, don't get me wrong, we do lore-based stuff, and I do write that down in adventure summaries and things, but a lot of my games are focused on getting them out, getting them having fun, statting the right sort of encounters, and giving them a map to play on. That's like 75% of my prep time, is sorting all that out, and then the rest is just making sure it's flavored right. Then it fits the session theme that they want to go on that day. If they're going out to fight ghost spiders, if they're going out to save a damsel in distress, all that kind of jazz. I have taken that advice from a book called Return of the Lazy DM, which is a great name for a book, and is one that you can buy online. It's called, I'll show you a picture of it. It's called From Sly Flourishes, and again, I'll give you a link to this. It's quite good. I don't think it was particularly expensive. Can definitely recommend it. But I just want to show you one very small section of this book. I'm not going to show you it all because I suggest you go and buy it if you're interested in doing DM type stuff. But basically, this is what his checklist, his recommended checklist, looks like. It's just underneath here. Basically, what you want to do is, for each session, review the characters that are going to be playing in that session. Make sure you start off strong. Write down any potential scenes that might happen, but don't plan them all, just write down what might happen. Define key secrets and clues. So it doesn't matter what scenes might happen, there will be a certain bunch of secrets and clues that you are expecting that those players to kind of find out. It might be a key to a door, or it might be a clue about the Prime Minister's secret affair, the King's lover, that kind of stuff. Come up with those sort of things. Come up with some great locations, so when they actually go out to those places, find the King's, where the King is, his fantastic world, where his, maybe even where he's having this affair, things like that. Come up with those. Important NPCs. So in this rather torrid example, you've got the King. So you can come up with a few important details about him, his motivations, why he's having said affair, the affairee, his wife, all those sort of things. Come up with some relevant monsters. So again, doesn't really matter what scene, but come up with a bunch of monsters that might come up. And then make sure you come up with some magic item rewards in case for when they complete their quest. Now, he goes into way more detail about all of this. The book is 100 pages long. It's not hugely long. You can read it fairly quickly. But his whole point in this book is that the more you prepare, the more you need to be aware that you're going to never use. And the less you prepare, but the more you're prepared for, the more you'll be able to just run kind of more streamlined sessions. The idea being that if you prep a whole world full of amazing things and then your characters just go off in one direction, they're never going to see the rest of all that stuff. But if you are 1, 2, 3 steps ahead of them, then you're only ever prepping that little bit. And that's generally what I try and do, at least. just stay that little bit ahead of my characters and my players, and have a overarching idea of where they're going, what they're doing, and what's coming before they do. That being said, my only slight addendum to that, and this is from someone that has run sort of a 4-hour session every week for the last 2.5 years, is that make sure you have some backup scenarios and be aware of your time management. Sometimes I prep a whole session and I think, oh, they're gonna get through half of this before the end of the session, have to turn back, and they'll have got through the whole thing in an hour, and I'm like, oh, what do we do now? Or vice versa. Sometimes I think, oh, they'll blast through this first section and then we'll get to this other bit and that would be good, and then they somehow spend 3.5 hours in this first section, get through, and then you have to be prepared to kind of lead them away again. So if you're running kind of a one shot, or even a campaign that has kind of a more structured time set, just make sure you're aware of what you're going to do if they either blitz through your whole session or kind of get a bit stuck. Like I say, I run 4-hour sessions. They're not hugely long, but it's like doing the presentation when you were a kid at school. When you weren't prepared, it felt like 4 hours was forever, and when you were over prepared, you ran out of time before you've done everything. So just make sure you've got some, you kind of know the adventure, and got a good feel for where they're going to go, and you've got some backup stuff. Keep aware on your time, and you should be good to go. Which largely brings us to the end of this workshop, I think. My voice is starting to slowly fail, and I think I've talked you through everything I had on the agenda. So are there any questions about anything I've gone through or anything else? Anything I haven't covered that you've got questions on? I think there's only a couple of people left, one person with a microphone left, yeah. So feel free to ask away.
Well, I mean, you covered most of the things that I was wondering or thinking about, and also, like, the most important question for me was the whole, what if you have structural weaknesses, and how do you deal with that? Something that might be a little bit more specific, I guess, would be just because you're like such an experienced DM, how would you handle if your group decided to, let's say, like, how there's the murder hobos concept, right? Like, either they're gonna, play with the world, or they're either just gonna kill everything that moves.
Yep.
Right. So, for example, if you're in a large town, or like not a large town, let's say like a large city, like a kingdom, for example, you're you're in the capital.
Yep.
How would you decide? Like, how would you deal with like player characters around the 6th or 7th level, which means they have access to fireball and like some of their big spells? Would you just constantly be throwing guards at them, or would you be throwing harder and harder encounters at them?
That's a good question. The answer to that is to definitely not just throwing guards at them, because guards are like a CR 1/8 or something.
Exactly.
And they're just going to get demolished. Yeah.
Exactly.
So, now, if you've ever played games like Skyrim or whatever, they pretty much, well, Skyrim actually is a bad example, because that pretty much does just throw guards at you. Exactly. And then throw you in jail. But most other sort of games, as you level up, so do the people protecting the towns. So it depends on. So the first thing is, it depends on your town. If your town would be appropriately capable to deal with a party of 7th level adventurers, then reskin some gladiators, because they're not going to be taking on too many gladiators. If all your guards are big burly men with reactions, 3 attacks, and the ability to shield bash people, they're going to be
Right.
doing a lot more protection than a guy who gets fried by a sacred flame spell. And there's absolutely nothing stopping you doing that. It's your town. There are also other things you can do. If you're running a kind of a city-based campaign, and your characters are just burning everything to the ground, you may want to go back to your session 0 and talk to them and just make sure that you're all playing the same game.
Right.
That's the key one. But if it's just, for instance, in my world, if they went to a town and actually just suddenly decided they didn't like that, they'd be more than welcome to burn it down. And if it was a town that was not well, so in my game, the towns are built before the players get there. They're not built really for the players. They're built to fit the part of the world that they're in, and the closer to the players' town they are, the easier they are. So if my players wanted to go and destroy the whole of Bastion Bay, it probably actually wouldn't be too hard for them, because they're getting quite high leveled now, and they found that town when they were quite small. If they went further away and found a town and they decided they wanted to burn it down, they might find that's a lot harder, because the town itself is out in the wilds. They were going to be protecting themselves from bandits, from people with magic, that kind of stuff. So maybe they wouldn't just have guards, they would also have kind of magical protection, or they would have buildings with sigils that would stop magic from hurting them. Maybe they make people sign a waiver before they come in that says they have to leave all spell scrolls at the door, that kind of stuff. So it's thinking a little bit more around just having CR 1/8 guards and what your town is and how you would deal with the threats that would be posed to that town, be it your party of 7th level adventurers or something else.
Right, because that makes absolute sense. Because for me, it was always like, well, I mean, if you, for example, play in a D&D campaign and you're like considered to be like renowned or national heroes, at some point I would understand if you're able to take care of a city or two, because it just escalates to that point.
Yeah, exactly. However, if they then take if they take down a city, when they go to the next city, who have almost definitely heard the fact that they've burnt down a city,
right? They can prepare accordingly. Exactly.
And they probably had trade routes with that town, so actually they now no longer don't like your adventurers, and so you have that battle. I like to try and stick to. So you know how your players have alignment, right?
Yeah.
In my campaign, they have alignment, but what I try and do is, in my head, and you could write this down if you like, but I just try and keep it more of a feeling type thing, is what's their alignment like in this town or place? So how have they been acting in this particular place, and how would people be reacting to them? For instance, did they save the town from the giant death shark, or did they wait 2 weeks and then only do it for 2,000 gold and half of their daughters? That their alignment, how that town feels about them, is going to be completely different. But there might be another town where they've been fantastic, and they haven't heard about the other town, and so it's sort of a bit alignment. I'm also not worried about changing characters' alignments if they start doing evil stuff. So if your characters start going evil, then if they're murdering and pillaging every town they go into, then say to them, okay, all your alignments have shifted down by 1. For those of you that are neutral, you're now lawful evil, and for those of you that were lawful good, you're now neutral. And then you'll kind of put that into their head that that's what's happening, if they haven't quite realized.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a murder hobo situation. I might have want to specify that. But it was just a thought that I was playing with, what if they decided that they didn't like a certain kingdom because of how they act or treat their citizens? For example, let's say it's an elven kingdom and they have dwarvish slaves, for example. Not that it's happening or anything. And in the end, you have let's say a party that consists of 3 elves, 1 humanoid who doesn't really particularly care about the about dwarves, and then you have kingdom with dwarvish slaves. So what if you have 3 dwarves, 1 humanoid, and a dragonborn? Sorry.
I know what you mean. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean that's that you're just playing D&D at that point, right? So
Exactly. So
it's
it makes sense to me. It's just how would I like? I was just confused because I was thinking for the longest time, how would you make the session like somewhat so that they get like a satisfactory end to it, that they did work really hard for this and it wasn't exactly easy. Because otherwise, if it was so easy, then you would wonder like, why are these dwarves still slaves for so many years?
yeah, that's it.
Right? And it was just gonna hit that balance. But it makes total sense that you mentioned it. Like I should just reskin some things and then
Yeah,
it actually works out.
reskinning is great. You can just make your guards way harder, and in fact, that's exactly something I, not in this campaign, but in a one shot I'd run before. Oh my god! I was like, guards are useless, and I think I found thugs, and they were like slightly better, so I used those and just called them guards. But
Exactly. Yeah.
like I say, yeah, I think or just roll up a 10th level fighter and call him captain of the guards, and then have a whole bunch of gladiators as his subordinates.
Right.
And now
That's what
suddenly
I've done,
you've
yeah.
got like a whole fearsome troop that the party might actually be scared of. But the
Yeah.
only thing I would say is that when reskinning things like that, if you just describe them as guards, the party will see in their head the CR 1/8 characters. If you say you come into the town and you see some guards, but these guards look particularly large, and one of them's got like rippling muscles, holding a shield that's way bigger than any you've seen before, and they don't look to be messed with. And when you go to the tavern, they're the people are giving them respect and their own table and stuff. You're telegraphing that information, and you're giving them that information so that they
maybe don't
know how to act. Exactly. Whereas if you just say you go into the town and there are a bunch of guards at the door as you go in, they'll just go, oh, okay, well, I'll just fireball them because they're just guards, and we killed a load of those guards at the other town.
Yeah.
But if they don't, and then if you suddenly say, okay, you hit the one guard, and oh no, he's a huge guy, that's when your players feel a bit like, oh, I see.
Makes sense. All right. Actually, that's very good. Yeah. Have you ever had to deal with like army combat? Like, let's say you're like a kingdom is at war, and basically, the king hired them to do a certain mission, like an infiltration mission.
Not really. No, we did have one session, I think, where the party came across a kind of like a two warring factions, and there was hundreds of people in the battle.
Right.
But it wasn't really the main point of the session, and so what happened is basically they kind of ran in to help one of the sides. The other side sent a division to attack them, and they had an encounter that was like smaller scale, them versus the appropriate amount of people. And then by the time they'd finished their battle, or whilst they were having their battle, I was describing what was happening in the rest of the larger battle as it went on. And so by the time they finished theirs, actually it was winding down, one side had beaten the other kind of thing.
I see. Okay.
But other than that, I've not done huge kind of large scale stuff like that.
You mentioned that you were like running a West Marches game, right? Which means you have more players than you usually have slots for, and that means you're basically running 2 or 3 groups, for 4 hours of D&D, right? In the same world.
Yeah, except it's only really one group because they pretty much they all work out between themselves. So it's not like we have 5 different people on each one. We'll have like we've got like a couple of people who play most sessions, and then we have a few ringers who come in and play, and then so there's a lot more cross contamination, pollination than having like 3 different groups.
Right. So was this always to begin with, like that they already worked it out amongst themselves, or did it like organically kind of grow?
So I started this campaign I went on Roll20. I said, I'm going to run a West Marches campaign. I need 10 players. Come and play with me. This is how it works. Let's have that. You guys organise your games. I don't care how you want to do that. But that's basically boiled down to now. Someone creates a session on Discord. We have a new Doodle, which is our website that you can kind of get availability from lots of people. They work out which 5 people are going to play. There's normally one person who says, I want to go and do this in a session, come with me. And they get 4 other people. So there's 5 of them. They say, DM, we want to play on this date. I say, okay, that's great, I'm free. And then we go on the adventure.
Okay. Because from what it sounded like to me, it was basically like you had 3 different groups of people. They were all doing their own adventures, and they like basically sort of had an effect on the world. And this world effect, or how the world was affected, could then be like witnessed by the other groups as well.
No, that's a slightly different style of game. This is all the players are together. They're kind of like on the same mission, basically.
Yeah.
They all, like I said, they all start and finish back at the main town, and so they come back and they tell each other what happened, and what. So they might have said, "Oh, we were going to go out and siege this castle and find all the treasure from this abandoned castle."
Right.
And then they might have got halfway through and come back and say, "Oh, we only made it halfway through, but we got all this information that the treasure is in the bottom throne room, and all we need is someone else to go there." And so someone else would be like, "Okay, let's go." Or the same party might go back in, next week or a couple of days or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had sessions where someone's been like abducted or like taken by another faction, and then like the whole group, like all 11 players, have gone like, right, let's go get them back. And we don't do that very often because having like more than 5 players in a session is atrocious. But
yeah, it is. It is.
But it's good fun, and it gives us all that kind of mix of stuff.
Just wondering, because you mentioned the whole kidnapping thing. If the player who got kidnapped, how would you treat them? Do you tell them like what you see, what you can like, how they can try to escape on their own, or is it basically okay? This player is basically shut out for the next session.
Bit of both. So you're only allowed 1 character in TDF, but I do allow you to have temporary characters. So if your character has been kidnapped or has been like killed, or but you think you could get their body back and resurrect them, then we've had instances where people have played like temporary characters who have had thematically good links into the world, or have sort of just come in for a while and then gone away again. Okay. And we have we know what our level average of the group is, because we link that into some bonus XP. And so generally for temporary characters, I say, okay, just roll 1 up at the average level, and then you'll be about the same as the rest of the group. And that works quite well.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I'm just noting this all down. So it's
no worries.
All right. I don't think, or nothing organically formulates in my mind right now.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll be around I don't think Alp's going to immediately delete this channel, so I'll be around in this for a while in the text. So if you've got any more questions come up, then just fire them away. I'm happy to answer. But for now, well done. Good job. I'm officially ending the stream, so goodbye, internet.
Yeah.